in the past have been generally bad because people can't seem to write.
He never chased fame. He built a world. Robert Smith didn't just write songs, he sculpted atmosphere. From the suburban gloom of Crawley to the neon haze of the world stage, The Cure became a language of its own. But behind the smeared lipstick and cathedral-sized choruses lies a private ritual, the albums that shaped him.
I think the general taste is usually pretty vile, and it's awful, because most people are...
When Robert Smith reveals his favourite albums, it isn't nostalgia, it's cartography, a map of feeling, fear and beauty, each record, a landmark in his inner landscape. These are the albums that didn't just influence him, they defined him. Here are the 10 albums Robert Smith holds above the rest, the ones that taught him how to haunt the world quietly. Number 1. Low by David Bowie. It sounded like loneliness, learning to breathe. When Robert Smith first heard Low, he understood that silence could have rhythm. It wasn't rebellion, it was reinvention. Bowie turned isolation into architecture, and Smith never stopped listening to those echoes. For Smith, Low was more than an album, it was an atmosphere. It arrived like a signal from another planet, something built from fragments of memory and machine. Recorded during Bowie's self-imposed exile in Berlin, it was sparse, unpredictable, and utterly sincere. To Smith, it didn't sound like sadness, it sounded like endurance. Each instrumental track felt like a person walking through ruins, learning to live with the emptiness. Robert Smith once said, "Bowie taught me that silence could be louder than words." That single idea became the foundation of The Cure's language. From 17 Seconds to Disintegration, Smith used space like Bowie used synthesizers to expose the soul beneath the noise. For Robert Smith, Low wasn't just music. It was a mirror, one that reflected every beautiful fracture he would later explore. Number 2. 5 Leaves Left by Nick Drake. Nick Drake didn't perform pain, he whispered it. Smith found in his songs the courage to stay fragile. Every note felt like weather, every pause a confession. It showed him that quiet could be louder than grief itself. For Robert Smith, 5 Leaves Left wasn't about despair, it was about acceptance. The first time he heard Riverman, he felt like he was listening to someone writing a letter they would never send. The stillness between Drake's words became a kind of prayer, a delicate refusal to perform emotion. Smith admired that restraint deeply. Robert Smith once said, "Nick Drake taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's design." That lesson stayed with him. The intimacy of 5 Leaves Left influenced the tenderness in songs like Homesick and Trust. Drake's guitar lines drifted like rain, and Smith borrowed that sense of weightless melancholy, transforming it into something electric.
Betty said she prayed today.
Drake's music didn't fill rooms, it filled silence. And that's where Smith found him. In that fragile, eternal quiet where sorrow stopped sounding sad and started sounding human. Number 3. The White Album by the Beatles. This record felt like freedom misbehaving, chaos and beauty colliding under one roof. Smith saw in it a map for contradiction, melody beside menace, order beside collapse. It taught him that truth in music never arrives tidy. For Robert Smith, the White Album proved that imperfection could be art. He loved how it sounded unfinished yet complete, like someone caught mid-thought. Every track existed in its own universe, but together they formed something unpredictable, almost reckless. It mirrored how Smith wanted The Cure to feel, unpolished but sincere, beautiful without explanation. Robert Smith once said, "The Beatles showed me that you could destroy your own formula and still sound like yourself." That revelation gave him permission to experiment. The fragmented structure of the White Album inspired his freedom on records like Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, shifting from romantic despair to surreal pop without apology. It wasn't nostalgia that drew him in, it was honesty. The album was chaos disciplined by melody, and Smith learned that sometimes the mess is the meaning. Number 4. Are You Experienced by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Electric, fluid, impossible. Hendrix's debut didn't just play, it possessed. Smith was young when he heard it, and it rewired him. He learned that sound could be alive, bending rules while keeping its heart intact. Are You Experienced made him realize that emotion wasn't limited to lyrics. It could exist purely in tone, in distortion that cried and shimmered. Hendrix didn't imitate the blues, he evolved it, creating landscapes where chaos became divine. Smith saw that music could burn and heal in the same breath. Robert Smith once said, "Hendrix made me believe that noise could be beautiful if it was honest." That honesty shaped Smith's guitar philosophy. He never chased technical perfection, he chased feeling. Songs like A Forest and Disintegration carried that same current of controlled volatility, where each chord felt like it might unravel but never did. Hendrix showed him that expression didn't need translation, it only needed conviction. And in that fire, Robert Smith found the courage to play imperfectly, on purpose. Number 5. The Velvet Underground and Nico, by The Velvet Underground. Darkness, detachment, and beauty. This was rebellion disguised as art. Smith heard permission in every dissonant chord. It wasn't about volume or polish, but honesty, the kind that bruises and glows at the same time. The Velvet Underground and Nico felt like a transmission from another dimension. Lou Reed and John Cale built songs that sounded like they'd been found in the aftermath of something, broken, tender, and strangely pure. Smith heard the courage to sound uncomfortable, to let ugliness exist beside beauty. That duality fascinated him. Robert Smith once said, "Lou Reed showed me that truth doesn't need to sound pretty to be profound." From Heroin to All Tomorrow's Parties, Smith found a blueprint for emotional honesty. The record's restraint, the whispered menace, the way Nico's voice floated like smoke, became part of The Cure's DNA. When he wrote songs like 100 Years or Cold, that same quiet defiance echoed through them. For Smith, this wasn't music for approval, it was art for survival, a reminder that imperfection can be the most human sound of all. Number 6. Unknown Pleasures, by Joy Division. It sounded like machinery dreaming. Smith felt both kinship and distance in those metallic pulses. Ian Curtis's voice didn't mourn, it measured the weight of silence. From that moment, Smith knew that despair could be designed. Unknown. Pleasures was less an album and more an atmosphere. Cold, symmetrical, almost architectural. Martin Hannett's production turned space into tension, and every drum beat felt like a countdown. Smith heard a kind of control in the chaos, a precision he deeply admired. Robert Smith once said, "Joy Division made sadness sound engineered. It wasn't emotion, it was architecture." That influence reshaped how he built The Cure's sound. You can hear it in the clean restraint of faith and the stark edges of pornography. Smith saw that despair didn't have to wail, it could whisper with precision.
See assassins all grouped and 4 lines dancing on the floor.
Ian Curtis's presence haunted him, not because it was tragic, but because it was real. For Smith, Unknown Pleasures became a lesson in control, how to hold chaos in your hands and make it sound calm. Number 7. The Scream, by Susie and the Banshees. This was the sound of control breaking beautifully. Sharp edges, clean rhythm, fearless posture. Playing with Susie taught Smith that darkness could be disciplined, that atmosphere could cut like glass without losing its grace. When the Scream arrived, it felt like a new language, post-punk stripped to its bones and sharpened to a knife point. Smith joined the Banshees on tour, absorbing the precision and poise that defined their sound. He learned how intensity could be calculated, how tension could move in rhythm rather than rage. Robert Smith once said, "Susie taught me that elegance can be louder than anger." That lesson became visible in The Cure's transformation from punk energy to sculpted emotion. Songs like Play for Today and The Hanging Garden carried that same structural ferocity, beauty delivered with discipline. The Scream wasn't just an album, it was mentorship in motion. For Smith, it was proof that darkness didn't need to explode. It could dance, measured and merciless, under a single spotlight. Number 8. The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, by Pink Floyd. Before shadows, there was wonder. Syd Barrett's imagination turned chaos into color, childhood into sound. Smith saw in it the balance between innocence and fracture, a blueprint for how beauty starts to decay. The Piper at the Gates of Dawn was like an open window into Barrett's mind, fantastical, unpredictable, and completely unguarded. For Robert Smith, it represented purity before self-awareness. There was no calculation, no pose, just creation for its own sake. It reminded him of what music felt like before ambition stepped in. Robert Smith once said, "Syd Barrett taught me that madness and imagination are the same doorway." You just have to decide whether to walk through. Barrett's blend of whimsy and melancholy shaped how Smith approached songwriting. You can hear it in early Cure tracks like Fire in Cairo or The Caterpillar, where surrealism hides something quietly tragic. For Smith, Piper wasn't nostalgia. It was instruction, a reminder that strangeness could still be sincere, and that the line between beauty and madness was exactly where art begins. Number 9. Another Music in a Different Kitchen by Buzzcocks. It was heartbreak at sprint speed. Smith loved how the Buzzcocks made melody collide with panic. The songs were brief, desperate, and true. They reminded him that emotion doesn't need time, only honesty and noise. Another Music in a Different Kitchen showed that punk could sing about feelings instead of fury. Robert Smith admired that contradiction. Songs about confusion delivered like a confession through clenched teeth. It was fast, but never careless. Every riff carried urgency without ego. Robert Smith once said, "The Buzzcocks taught me that pop can bleed and still sound like joy." That contradiction became a Cure signature, melancholy that moved. Tracks like Boys Don't Cry and Just Like Heaven owe as much to Buzzcocks as to any Gothic influence. Smith learned that sadness could be rhythmic, and rhythm could make sadness survivable. For Smith, their music wasn't rebellion, it was relief, proof that the heart could break at full tempo and still keep perfect time. Number 10. Talk, Talk, Talk by the Psychedelic Furs. Poetry with a pulse. Smith heard himself in its tension, romance tangled in static. The record made melancholy move, made heartbreak dance. It proved that sadness, when rhythmic, could feel almost joyful. Talk, Talk, Talk arrived when the Cure were already defining their own sound, yet it resonated deeply. The Psychedelic Furs blurred poetry with confrontation, turning longing into something cinematic. Their noise wasn't aggression, it was texture, emotion, painted in distortion. Smith saw a reflection of himself in that balance of tenderness and defiance. Robert Smith once said, "The Psychedelic Furs reminded me that you can be romantic and still sound dangerous." That duality shaped his later work. Songs like Push and The Walk carried that same momentum. Melody stretched over nervous energy. Beauty pulled through static. For Smith, Talk, Talk, Talk wasn't imitation, it was affirmation. Proof that vulnerability could roar, and that love, when distorted, might just echo longer. He was never chasing perfection, only feeling. Robert Smith built his world from borrowed ghosts, quiet geniuses, and sounds that refused to fade. Every album he loved became a mirror, translating isolation into melody and melancholy into motion. These records weren't chosen for influence or fame. They were chosen because they made him feel. Because even now, when the world turns too loud, they still whisper back. Music, for Smith, was never escape. It was endurance. Vulnerability became his rebellion. Beauty his disguise. Which of these albums speaks to you? Which one still haunts your silence? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more stories from music's quiet revolutions. Because Robert Smith never followed the world, he taught it how to listen.